All right, let's bring in Pontiac's newly elected mayor, Tim Greimel. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure, Bankole. Thanks for having me.
Likewise. Let's talk about Pontiac now under your tenure. I want to talk about economic development.
Yep.
Because that's the common denominator between Pontiac, Benton Harbor, Flint, Detroit, and other urban enclaves. It's always the economy, unemployment,
Yes.
The question, of course, of police and poverty and all of that. In your administration, where does economic development rank as it relates to getting Pontiac out of the economic doldrums?
It ranks very high on our list of priorities, but I think it's important that we talk about economic development in the right way, and
Right.
that when we focus on economic development, we focus on it in a way that really benefits residents. Because economic development and community development really are the same thing, or at least they should be the same thing if city government is doing its job right. Whenever we talk about bringing investment to a community, it needs to be done in a way that benefits the residents of that community. And I think for too long, we've seen situations where investment has flowed into a community, but it's done so in a way that really hasn't helped the average resident. And there are a few ways that economic development, community development, bringing investment to a community should help everyday residents. One, and kind of the most obvious way, is through getting jobs that are filled by Pontiac residents in our case.
But not bringing jobs where Pontiac residents are not hired by those who are bringing the jobs.
Well, that's right.
But people are being brought in to work in the city.
Well, exactly. That's the concern. That's what we want to avoid. We want to avoid jobs coming to Pontiac and them all being filled by outsiders. That doesn't mean that every single job has to be filled by a Pontiac resident, but we want to make sure that Pontiac residents get our fair share of those jobs and that they're not just filled by people outside the city. So that's a key priority. And part of that is about leaning on companies to do the right thing. Part of it is making sure that companies actually get the word out about hiring. Some of it, though, involves working with community partners to do workforce development, to make sure that Pontiac residents have the skills and capacities to fill some of those jobs. And some of that is a short-term effort, but some of that is a long-term effort, and it may take some time to do that.
Yeah.
But some of the other ways that are really key are, whenever investment comes, it should increase tax revenue to the city, and that tax revenue should be invested by the city in residents, in improved city services for residents, and improved investments in job training, in apprenticeship programs, in youth recreation and youth enrichment programs. Those are both short-term and long-term strategies to actually lift up the well-being, the quality of life, and economic opportunity for our residents. And these are really critically important things to focus on. I think far too often we've seen in some communities over the years that investment is brought, but it's brought by lavishing these overly generous tax incentives on businesses, meaning that the city's not getting additional tax revenue, or not getting much additional tax revenue.
Right.
And that's its own problem.
Yeah. Does that mean under the Tim Greimel administration no tax breaks?
It doesn't mean no tax breaks, period. But what it does mean is we're going to be very judicious, and we already have been very judicious in awarding tax breaks. And we've set clear criteria about when tax breaks are justified. It has to do with the number of jobs, not the number of jobs brought, but the number of jobs filled by Pontiac residents. That is a key criteria that we've set in order to determine whether tax breaks will be awarded. It also means making sure that there is some substantial increase in tax revenue. So we can forego some of the additional tax increase, that tax revenue increase that might come with increased property values or jobs, but we're not going to forego all of it. So it's about that right balance. We understand that to be competitive with other communities and other states, some tax incentives may be necessary, but we're going to be very targeted to those companies that are still providing some additional tax revenue so that we can improve city services, but also who are actually hiring Pontiac residents. So it's really about making sure that tax incentives are only given when there are concrete, real benefits to Pontiac's residents.
So that takes me to corporate social responsibility. Companies in a community and whether they're reinvesting or investing in that community. When you look at the list of companies that you have in Pontiac right now, you know, percentage-wise, how many companies can you say are in fact, you know, are employing Pontiac residents? Do you have a number? Can you give an estimate?
I can give an estimate.
Yeah.
Our biggest employer in Pontiac is United Wholesale Mortgage.
Right.
They employ, and it, you know, it bounces around a little bit, but roughly 8,000 people work at United Wholesale Mortgage.
That's
in
a lot
the
of
city
people.
Pontiac. It is a lot of people, and they're by far our biggest employer. They employ some Pontiac residents. About 10% of their workforce is Pontiac residents. It's not awful. We've had certainly employers in the city who have employed far less of their workforce than that, but it's not where it needs to be. We need to get that number much higher than 10%.
Where do you want to get it to? 40%, 50%?
I'd like to see it get to at least 30% of United Wholesale Mortgage
Which is the
employees.
standard, which has been the standard threshold.
Exactly, that's right. And, you know, again, we understand that, you know, there are going to be some Pontiac residents who maybe don't fit the criteria for hiring there. But we believe that most Pontiac residents who have a high school graduation and degree do fit the bill for initial employment at United Wholesale Mortgage. And we're working with the company to try to improve the percentage of their employees who are hired who are from Pontiac. And we also recognize that we have an obligation in partnership with the school district and other community partners to better prepare more Pontiac residents for employment at United Wholesale Mortgage and other places.
Yeah, and you know, I do recognize that you don't run the school district, you're the mayor. There's a strong demarcation there between, you know, the role of the mayor and the role of the district superintendent. But on the quality of life issue, which obviously economic development weighs in significantly, I'm sure you've done your inventory in terms of, you know, looking at what the city of Pontiac needs. Let's look at the Pontiac's social index on quality of life issues here. Can you run the gamut for me in terms of right now what Pontiac needs as we speak? Outside of course, the largest employer of labor.
Well, that's right. And I'm stating the obvious here, but our poverty rate, our unemployment rates are far too high. And you know, it's really about investing in bringing jobs to the community, as I said, but the most important thing isn't bringing jobs there, it's getting those jobs filled by Pontiac residents. And so that really is about investing in workforce development. Now, that starts with early quality childhood education. It continues with K through 12 education in partnership with the school district, in partnership as well with charter schools and neighboring school districts. A lot of Pontiac young people who live in the city actually go to neighboring school districts for their education. So we want to partner with all of the educational players, K through 12. And then also with Oakland Community College, Oakland University. We do have a partnership, a formal partnership with Oakland University, but we'd like to see Oakland University do more things in a tangible way that really benefit Pontiac residents. But education, as you know, Bankole, is so key to economic opportunity today. You know, 40 years ago, a person could graduate with a high school education or less in Pontiac, walk down the street a few blocks and get a good paying job at an auto plant. Those days are gone. And to really get good paying jobs, people are either going to need a college education or or alternatively a skilled trade.
And you're right. But also 40 years ago, if you flip it or more, Pontiac's history informed by the busing, that prominent case, of course, which the late federal judge Damon Keith ruled in that particular case. Pontiac's history and its right to self-determination now is also informed by that history.
Very much so.
How much of that is informed by your vision for economic development and equity for Pontiac?
Well, in the United States and in many areas of the world, in fact, but certainly in the United States, there is a strong correlation between racism and racial division and economic inequality. And that's certainly true across our country. It's particularly true in cities like Pontiac. And it's very much informed by a long history, well, centuries-long history in the country, but in places like Pontiac, a history that goes back now at least 100 years, of very stark racism and segregation that has deprived black workers and black families from the same economic opportunities as whites. And that really came into very stark relief during the busing controversy.
Right. Yeah.
And of course, Albert Hatchett, an attorney who recently passed away, and you and I talked a little bit about that a year ago when he passed, sadly. He, with other attorneys, led the charge to get a court order requiring integration in the Pontiac school system. That was a big victory, but a lot of whites at the time reacted to that by leaving the community.
Yeah, white flight.
That's right. And with their departure, they took money with them, they took jobs with them, and Pontiac is still struggling because of that disinvestment that occurred for a number of reasons. Part of it was that white flight, that white racism in reaction to that court ruling.
Yeah.
Some of it was because of restructuring in the auto industry, jobs going overseas. But that is very much, all of those factors are very much part of the legacy that we're struggling with in Pontiac today.
Right. So much of that white backlash, the vestiges still remains. Your relationship with Oakland County, they provide public safety, right?
They do indeed, yeah.
Right.
The Sheriff's Office provides public safety services. That began under emergency management. And
are you going to get to a place where Pontiac polices itself?
Well, we're actively exploring that.
Okay.
Right before, I came into office this past January,
Right,
so I've been in
right.
office about 10 months.
Right.
The current city council was all newly elected at the same time.
Okay.
Right before we took office in January, the previous city council last December entered into a new contract with the Oakland County Sheriff's Office, and that's a 3-year contract.
So they did not wait for this new city council.
They did not.
They could have given this new council the deference to do so.
They could have.
Right.
Now, the contract awkwardly expired on January 1st, so it was a very difficult position that they were put in in fairness to them. But we're committed to doing a comprehensive analysis before renewing that contract in about 2 years now.
Okay.
Doing a comprehensive analysis about what makes the most sense. Obviously, we want to make sure that we have adequate policing in the community, but we also want to make sure that that policing is done in partnership with the community and that it's not imposed on the community. And there have been a couple of incidents just in the past 10 months that have raised a lot of community concern about the fairness and equity of the police response in Pontiac. In fact, tomorrow evening, tomorrow night's Wednesday night, we're doing a public town hall in the community about public safety. And part of that includes discussions about how to reduce violent crime, but it also includes how to better hold the Sheriff's Office accountable. They have now deployed body cameras in Pontiac, which is very good news. And that's one, and that's not the only step, but it's one important step in trying to make sure that deputies are held accountable for fairness and equity and not that they're not engaging in police brutality.
And you can choose not to renew their contract.
Well, that's right, exactly.
You know, and that could be the biggest cudgel over their head.
That's exactly right. But it may make sense to bring our police department back. We have to be sensitive to cost, of course.
Right.
And we have to be sensitive to making sure the response times are reasonable, and when people call 911 because of a very serious violent incident, that the police respond.
Right.
But there are real advantages to having one's own police department, and we want to explore whether it's possible and whether it makes sense.
And not to run the risk of being too overly simplistic here on urban issues, but Pontiac is not as big as Detroit.
Well, that's right.
You know, it's a small city like, you know, Benton Harbor and other small cities like Flint. It does not require, you know, a mammoth, you know, investment, if you will, to change the tide,
Yes.
in service of economic, empowerment for that community.
It's a really important point because Pontiac, according to the last census, has 62,000 people. So it's a little less than a
Right.
tenth the size of Detroit.
Right.
And so a little goes a long way. We don't have large areas in the
Right,
city
right.
that are
Yep.
that are completely devastated
Right.
economically. And so a modest amount of investment can be truly transformative
Yeah.
in a city the size of Pontiac.
All right, great. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, my friend.
All right, Tim Greimel is the mayor, the newly elected mayor of Pontiac, a former legislator in Lansing, talking to us about the state of affairs in Pontiac. Thank you so much for being here, tuning in to Sunday Nation here on MyTV38 WADL-Detroit. Don't forget, Tuesday is election day to exercise that important franchise. We'll be watching for the results, and of course, next week we will let you know who is elected governor, attorney general, secretary of state, and other important offices that will be on the ballot this Tuesday. Thanks again for being here. If it is Sunday, it is Sunday Nation. I'm Bankole Thompson.